My daughter must have forgotten to hang up the phone. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but her voice came through clear as day. She thought I wasn't listening anymore. "It's time," she said softly but firmly. "He needs to be in a home. It's just too much. He's become a burden." A burden. That word landed like a stone in my chest. I sat there, the receiver still warm in my hand, and felt something deep inside me shift. Not with anger, but with the slow, quiet breaking of something that had been holding on for too long. A string, stretched thin with love and hope, finally snapping under the weight of reality. I didn't say a word, not then, but I made a decision. I sold the house, the same house where Ellen and I raised our children, painted walls with laughter, and planted roses that still bloomed every spring. It sold for $890,000. A fair price, I suppose, for the walls that had once echoed with bedtime stories and holiday songs. They came back from their business trip, faces lit with the glow of corporate success, suitcase wheels humming on the pavement. They didn't know, not yet. The moment they reached the porch, the first surprise hit. The key didn't fit. They jiggled it once, twice, then tried again with confusion turning to panic. A note was taped neatly to the door. Just one sheet of paper. I wasn't there to see their faces, but I can imagine them. Smiles fading, eyes scanning the words, and then screaming, raw, loud, like the kind of scream that comes not from fear, but from betrayal. That's when I knew. They weren't going to take this lying down. No, they'd come back for answers. They'd demand explanations. But this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Before we go any further, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell us where you're tuning in from. It helps more than you know. The phone rang just as I was scraping the last meatball off my plate. Ellen's old recipe. I'd followed it step by step, like always. But no matter how closely I stuck to it, they never quite tasted the same without her. Maybe it was the way she stirred the fools while humming under her breath. Maybe it was just her. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled. "Caitlin," I said aloud to the empty kitchen. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you?" Her voice came through with that familiar warmth, the kind that wraps around you like an old quilt on a cold night. A voice that still made my chest ache in the best and worst ways. Love and loneliness, braided so tightly together I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I sank into Ellen's old armchair, the leather smoothed and faded from years of her evening reading. She always had a book in her hand and a story on her lips. "Oh, you know me, honey," I said. "Just finished dinner. Was about to watch the news." I didn't tell her that dinner had been leftovers from 3 days ago, or that I'd spent the better part of an hour just staring at Ellen's photo on the mantel, as if she might look back at me this time. "You eating enough?" Caitlin asked. "You know you can order groceries online now, well, right? I showed you how to use the app." "I eat plenty," I said with a chuckle, trying to sound light, but even I could hear the tiredness in my voice. Then I paused for a beat and added gently, "Though I did scare myself a bit yesterday. Forgot to turn off the burner under the coffee pot. The smell caught me from the living room just in time." There was a moment of silence on the other end, not the quiet kind, the heavy kind. I could picture her then, just as clear as if she were standing in front of me, brows furrowed in that exact way her mother used to when she was worried, that tiny crease between her eyes, the same one Ellen had. Some things never change, and some change whether you're ready or not. "Dad," she said gently, "maybe we should talk about having someone come by to check on you more often." There was a pause, then a man's voice, calm, almost dismissive. "Jeremy thinks you're fine, Caitlin." "Really?" Her tone shifted slightly, trying to sound casual. "So, how was your trip? You're still in Phoenix, right?" "Yeah," I replied. "The conference wraps up tomorrow. Jeremy's handled most of the client meetings, while I've been stuck listening to endless presentations about digital marketing trends." She laughed, lightly, but something about it felt off, forced, hollow maybe. "Listen, Dad, I should probably get going," she said quickly. "Jeremy and I have dinner with some potential investors tonight." "Of course, sweetheart. Go on. I love you." I love you too, Dad. Take care of yourself, okay? Then I heard a soft click, followed by the faint rustle of fabric. She must have slipped the phone into her purse, I thought, reaching to hang up. But then, I heard voices, muffled but still just clear enough to make out. The phone hadn't disconnected. Jeremy, did you see how much worse he's gotten? Caitlin's voice again, but now it was different. No warmth, no concern, just frustration. Yesterday, he forgot to turn off the stove. What if he burns the house down? My hand froze, still gripping the receiver. A coldness crept across my chest, spreading like ice through my ribs. It's time for assisted living, Caitlin, Jeremy replied, his tone blunt, unemotional. He's becoming a burden, and you know it. Your father's a good man, but he can't live alone anymore. Then her voice again, lower now and disturbingly practical. The house is worth nearly $1 million now. That hit harder than I expected. Not because she was wrong, but because of how easily she said it, like she was quoting numbers off a spreadsheet. With the Denver market the way it is, she continued, we could easily get 900,000, maybe more. Exactly, Jeremy agreed, sounding satisfied. We sell it, get him into a decent place, not too pricey, and finally make the move on that house in Boulder, the one with the mountain view. And then she laughed, really laughed. Oh my God, Jeremy, you have to see it tonight. It's perfect. I'm so glad we're finally doing this. He has no idea we're planning it. Jeremy chuckled. The longer we wait, he said, the more confused he's going to get. We should act while he still completely trusts us. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, echoing clatter. The same floor Ellen and I had installed with our own hands 23 years ago. Each plank laid with care, every nail driven in with the hope of a future we were building together. A future I thought would last forever. Now I sat frozen in the sudden silence of an empty house. A silence so complete it seemed to ring in my ears. My eyes locked onto the photo of Ellen on the mantle. Her smile captured in time, her eyes staring back at me with something I couldn't quite name. Was it disappointment? A warning? Or maybe just the silent knowing of someone who has already crossed to the other side and seen the bitter truths we living souls are still too afraid to face. The old pendulum clock in the hallway, a 15th anniversary gift from Ellen, ticked steadily in the gathering dusk. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Its rhythm the only sound in a house that once overflowed with laughter, music, and love. Outside, I heard the first chirps of spring crickets, singing their evening songs in the garden Ellen had planted with her bare hands. The garden I still tended, as if keeping her flowers alive might somehow keep a piece of her close to me. But inside my chest, something cold and solid had begun to settle. It crept in slowly, replacing the warmth I'd felt just moments earlier when I heard Caitlin's voice. That voice, my daughter, my little girl now grown, now plotting with her husband to put me away while I was still breathing, still listening, still here. My hands calloused and scarred from decades of construction work, curled slowly into fists. They think I'm a burden. They think I'm confused. They think I'm weak, helpless, and ready to be managed, discarded. They've already spent my money in their minds, already laid out a brand new life to be built on the grave they've quietly dug for me. But I'm not dead, and I'm not nearly as lost as they think. I don't know how long sat there in the gathering dark, Ellen's face watching me from her silver frame on the end table, her eyes seeming to follow me across the room, with a gaze that had known me better than anyone ever would again. The house felt different now. Like it too had heard my daughter's betrayal. Like even the walls were holding their breath, as if the house itself knew something had changed forever. My legs trembled slightly as I finally stood up and reached for the light switch. A soft, warm glow spilled across the living room, illuminating a space that Ellen and I had filled piece by piece. Over years of careful saving, patient planning, and love poured into every corner. Every item in that room told a story. The deep maroon sofa, a bold color we debated for weeks, was the same one Caitlin used to curl up on. Books scattered in her lap, scribbling through homework late into the evening. The coffee table, handmade in my garage, still bore the faint marks of sanding. I remembered smoothing the wood while Caitlin, no more than 6, chased dust motes around my feet, giggling. I stepped into the kitchen. The tile was cool under my feet, and the silence, so complete just moments ago, was now replaced by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the house settling. I pulled open the drawer where we kept old receipts and paperwork, a chaotic archive Ellen refused to part with. "You never know when you'll need these," she used to say, and like always, she'd been right. My fingers sifted through the papers until they brushed against something familiar. A thick folder, slightly worn at the edges. Inside, 2 decades of financial records I could never bring myself to throw away. There it was, Caitlin's college tuition. 4 years at the University of Colorado, $48,000. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had spent so many nights, covered in sawdust and drywall dust after long shifts on the job site. I remembered coming home exhausted, the grit of concrete still in my hair, my hands aching, fingernails caked in plaster. Ellen would be there, always, a fresh pot of coffee waiting, her gentle hands kneading the tension out of my shoulders. "Roy," she said one night, watching me crunch numbers on the back of an old electric bill, trying to figure out how we'd afford Caitlin's spring semester, "you're going to work yourself to death." "She deserves better than us," I replied without looking up. "She's smart enough to do anything, Ellen. We have to give her a chance." Ellen leaned down and kissed the top of my head. "Just don't give her so much," she whispered, "that she forgets how to be grateful." God, I should have listened. Oh, Ellen, I should have listened. I kept flipping through the folder. Wedding expenses. Another page. Another number. $32,000. For one day. One day of white linens, string lights, catered shrimp, and flower arrangements flown in from somewhere I can't even remember now. But I remember the look on Caitlin's face as she walked down the aisle. The way Jeremy beamed like he'd won the lottery. The way Ellen gripped my hand under the table during the reception, tears in her eyes, whispering, "We did it. We really did it." And we had. We gave her everything. And now they were planning their future on the ashes of my life. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I told Caitlin we could afford £5,000 for the wedding. Maybe 8 if we stretched and sacrificed a bit. But she cried, really cried, because she wanted her dream wedding. And I couldn't bear to see her heartbroken. So I spent 6 straight months working weekends, laying hardwood floors for a friend who was a contractor, a side job that paid me in cash under the table, just so she could have the day she dreamed of. "Dad," she whispered during our father-daughter dance, her head resting on my shoulder, the fabric of her wedding dress rustling softly against the rental tux I could barely afford. "You're the best father in the world." I would never forget that moment. But she did. She forgot, just like she forgot who co-signed on her first car loan when her credit wasn't good enough. She forgot who spent days on the phone, pulling strings and calling in favors, so she could land her first marketing job after being unemployed for 8 long months after graduation. Later, I found a bank statement from 2 years ago, the year Jeremy lost his job as a financial advisor for reasons they never fully explained. They moved in with me just for a while, just until Jeremy got back on his feet. I never asked for rent, never brought up the rising utility bills or the grocery receipts for 3 adults instead of one lonely widower. I covered it all, quietly. Jeremy used to clap me on the back and say, "You're the most generous man in all of Colorado, Roy." And Caitlin would hug me and whisper, "Dad, we'll repay you someday once we're on our own." Well, they've been on their own for over a year now. Both have great jobs. They earn more money between them than I ever did. But they've never brought up moving out, never once mentioned paying me back. Last month, I paid for their anniversary dinner, $200 at a fancy downtown steakhouse, because Jeremy said, we deserve to celebrate. And I picked up the tab because that's what I do. Then there was the car repair bill. Jeremy's beloved BMW needed a new transmission, $3,000. It wiped out my entire emergency fund, every last cent. At their last barbecue with friends, I overheard him laughing and saying, "Roy's like a father to me." His arms slung casually over my shoulder. "I'm lucky I married into this family," he said, and I believed him. God help me, I was proud. I was proud to be the generous father-in-law, the steady hand, the quiet man who took care of everyone, no matter the cost, even when the cost was everything. I told Caitlin, gently but honestly, that we could afford £5,000 for the wedding, maybe 8 if we really tightened our belts. Cut back on groceries, delay the roof repairs, dip into the savings meant for emergencies, not fairy tales. But she cried, not a tantrum, not a manipulative whimper, real tears, big, aching, desperate sobs like the kind she used to cry when she scraped her knee at 5 years old and thought the world had ended. "It's my dream wedding, Dad," she said, voice cracking. Tears streaked down her face, and something in me, some foolish, soft part that had never learned to say no to her, gave way. I couldn't stand it, couldn't bear to see her disappointed. Not when I'd spent her whole life trying to protect her from disappointment. So I picked up my toolbox and said yes. For 6 straight months, I gave up my weekends, laying hardwood floors for a friend who ran a small contracting business, a side hustle that paid me under the table, cash only. Long hours, hard work, knees sore, back stiff, hands cramping by Sunday night. But I did it because she wanted a dress with a train and flower arrangements from out of state. Because she wanted string lights and live music and a custom cake from a bakery 3 towns over. Because she wanted what she called her once-in-a-lifetime day. And when the day came, she looked radiant, absolutely radiant. During the father-daughter dance, she laid her head on my shoulder. Her wedding gown rustled against the scratchy tuxedo I'd rented. I'd eaten toast for lunch for a week to afford that rental. "Dad," she whispered, her voice soft and full of love, "you're the best father in the world." I'll never forget those words. They burned themselves into my memory like a brand. But somewhere along the way, she did forget. Just like she forgot who co-signed on her first car loan when her credit score couldn't even get her through the door. Just like she forgot who spent hours calling around, begging former clients, old connections, old friends of friends, to help her land an interview when she'd been out of work for 8 months after graduation. She forgot all of it. A few weeks ago, while cleaning out the drawer in the hallway, I found a bank statement from 2 years ago. The year Jeremy lost his job as a financial advisor. They never said why, just vague phrases like company politics and misunderstanding. I didn't push, didn't pry. They moved in just temporarily, just until Jeremy got back on his feet. I didn't charge them a cent in rent, didn't complain when the electric bill doubled or when the fridge emptied twice as fast. I simply adjusted, quietly. I bought groceries for 3 instead of 1, paid for their shampoo and wine and streaming subscriptions. I even replaced the water heater when it went out, something Jeremy promised to help with but never quite got around to. Jeremy used to clap me on the back after dinner and say, "Roy, you're the most generous man in all of Colorado." And Caitlin would hug me, kiss my cheek, and whisper, "Dad, we'll make it up to you one day, when we're stable." Well, that day came over a year ago. They both have good jobs now, stable incomes, promotions, benefits. They make more in a month than I did in 3, but they've never mentioned moving out, never once offered to pitch in, never asked me how my savings were doing, never noticed when I stopped ordering the weekly paper or canceled the lawn service. Last month, I paid for their anniversary dinner, $200 at a steakhouse downtown because Jeremy said, "We deserve to celebrate, don't we, Roy?" And I smiled, nodded, picked up the check, because that's what I do. Then there was the car. Jeremy's BMW, his pride and joy, needed a new transmission, $3,000. He didn't even ask, just mentioned the mechanic's estimate while I was stirring my coffee one morning. Said it in passing like it was the weather, so I paid it. And it drained my entire emergency fund. Every dollar Ellen and I had saved, just in case. At their last barbecue, with all their friends gathered around the patio, I rebuilt myself. I overheard Jeremy say, "Roy's like a second father to me." His arms slung over my shoulder like we were college buddies. I'm lucky I married into this family. And you know what? For a moment, I believed him. I stood there flipping burgers, feeling a strange swell of pride in my chest. Not because I had money, but because I had mattered. I was proud. God help me, I was proud to be the kind of man people depended on. Proud to be the one who carried others. The quiet presence. The giver. Even when the giving cost me everything. I walked slowly up the stairs, my hand grazing the familiar banister Ellen and I had stained ourselves so many years ago. Each step creaked in that same comforting rhythm, like an old song I never forgot the words to. I reached the bedroom, our bedroom, a room left untouched for the last 2 years, as though time itself had decided to pause here, out of respect, out of love. Everything was just as it had been. Her jewelry box sat on top of the wardrobe, the lid slightly open like she might return any moment to pick out a pair of earrings for Sunday morning service. Her reading glasses, still folded neatly next to the soft glow lamp on her nightstand, waiting patiently for a final chapter that would never be finished. I walked to the dresser and bent down to open the bottom drawer, the one where we always kept the important documents, passports, insurance papers, and there it was, the deed to the house, original, official, untouched. Roy and Ellen Hayes, purchased 1989, no liens, no complications, no second name added after her death. It had always been ours. But now, legally, it was mine. Standing there in the same room where Ellen had spent her final weeks, surrounded by the life we had built from scratch, by hand, with sweat, love, and long nights, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, sharp and aching, like a shard of glass buried too deep to remove. But beneath it, something else had begun to form, something colder, steadier, resolve. They wanted to put me away, to tuck me into a room in a care facility and sell off the only home I'd ever truly known. The home I built for my family, for Ellen, for Caitlin. They thought I was too old, too confused, too grateful for their scraps of attention to fight back. They were wrong. I turned toward the bedside table and looked at the photo of Ellen. Her smile frozen in time, eyes twinkling like she always knew something the rest of us didn't. And I could almost hear her voice from years ago, soft but firm. Don't give her so much that she forgets to be grateful. Oh, Ellen, our daughter has forgotten. But she's about to remember. She's about to realize that her father isn't as helpless as she believed. I left the bedroom and walked down the hall to the small office where I used to handle our bills, write Christmas cards, and fix broken toys late at night with a magnifying glass and a pair of tweezers. I opened the desk drawer and reached inside, my fingers brushing against a small, stiff rectangle I hadn't touched in years. A business card, still crisp. Todd Fisher, real estate attorney. Ellen had insisted we meet with him right after her diagnosis. Just in case, she'd said. Just in case one of us needed protection. Just in case something happened. Just in case people forgot what this home meant. It was time to schedule another consultation. The next morning, I walked through my own home as though I were seeing it for the first time, but not through my eyes, through theirs, through Caitlin's, through Jeremy's. I didn't see warmth, didn't see memories. I saw what they saw, square footage, resale value, liquid assets. In the kitchen, I ran my hands slowly along the cool granite countertop. I'd installed it myself after work, under a single flickering bulb in the evening hours because we couldn't afford to hire a professional. I remembered how Ellen had picked out the pattern, a swirling gray and gold veined stone that caught the light just right in the early morning sun. She made coffee here every single morning for 16 years, until the cancer made it impossible for her to lift the kettle. I still remember the way she hummed softly while she stirred cream into our mugs. Little habits that built a life. Then the memory hit me. Christmas morning, Caitlin was just 3 years old. She took her first steps right here from the fridge to Ellen's waiting arms. We both cried. Ellen scooped her up and spun her around in circles, laughing through tears while I fumbled with the camera, too choked up to find the shutter button in time. That was the kind of moment we built this house for. Not market value, not equity, not retirement plans, family. And now they wanted to rip it from me, turn it into boiserie and future upgrades and mortgage payments on a Mountain View house I'd never lived to see. No, not without a fight. Not while I still had a name on that deed. Not while Ellen's voice still echoed through these rooms. Our little girl is learning to walk in the home we built for her, Ellen whispered, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I remember that moment as if it happened yesterday, her voice thick with emotion, her hand gripping mine as we watched Caitlin's wobbly legs carry her from the couch to Ellen's open arms. Each stumble, each tiny triumphant step echoed through the house like a prayer answered. This wasn't just a house, it was a story, our story, etched into every wall, every floorboard, every memory-laden corner. The living room alone held 25 Christmas mornings. I still remember the look on Caitlin's face when she was 7, wide-eyed, glowing, as she laid eyes on the dollhouse sitting beneath the tree. She didn't know I'd spent 3 months building it in the garage, piecing it together quietly after she went to sleep each night. I worked in secret, measuring, sanding, gluing under a bare bulb, with frozen fingers and a full heart. And Ellen, God, Ellen, she sewed tiny curtains for those miniature windows. She made little chairs and beds out of cardboard and scrap fabric, her needle working its magic like always. She turned it from a toy into a home. "Daddy, it looks just like ours," Caitlin had squealed, and she was right. We'd made it a perfect replica, down to the smallest window in her upstairs bedroom. That tiny window had cost me 6 months of overtime to install. Ellen had clipped a photo from a magazine years before, circling the window with a red pen. "This," she said, eyes gleaming. "I want to read under this." I told her it was too expensive. She said it was too impractical. We both knew we couldn't afford it, but I learned to cut angles I'd never cut before. Measured and remeasured until my back ached and my knees went numb from crawling around the frame. "Roy, we can't afford this," Ellen had said gently, watching me sketch measurements on the drywall. "If you want it, you'll have it," I told her. And I meant it. I always meant it. I climbed the stairs slowly, my fingers brushing the walls as if to draw strength from them. I stopped outside Caitlin's old room, the one with the butter yellow paint she chose for her 16th birthday. The posters were still up, photos of high school friends, printed college memories curling at the edges with time. It was in this very room that I once rocked her through nights of stomach aches and growing pains, where Ellen and I spent hours hunched over algebra worksheets, coaching her through equations at the small white desk I'd built myself to fit perfectly under the window. That same window I gave up weekends to install. Every inch of this house had a heartbeat, but the master bedroom, that one was still the hardest. Ellen's side of the bed was untouched. Her glass of water still sat on the nightstand, half full, undisturbed, as though she might reach for it any second. Her bookmark was still tucked between the yellowed pages of a novel, holding place at page 247, a story she'd never get to finish. I had built the closets in this room with my own hands, wide, custom-sized to fit her frame exactly, because she always hated how store-bought wardrobes wasted vertical space. I remember crouching on the hardwood floor, pencil behind my ear, watching her walk back and forth with the measuring tape, imagining where each shoe would go. She believed in building things that lasted, and so did I. And now they wanted to sell it all, strip it down to profit margins and real estate values, treat it like an asset instead of the life we built. But I wasn't done fighting for it. Not yet. Her clothes still hung in the closet, neatly arranged, just the way she always kept them, sorted by season, by color. And somehow, after all this time, they still carried the faint trace of her perfume, that soft, floral scent that used to greet me every evening when I came home from work, now lingered like a ghost in the folds of fabric. This room wasn't just where we slept. It was where we planned our life, where we whispered our dreams into the dark, dreams for each other, dreams for Caitlin. It was in this very room, in this very bed, that Ellen took her last breath, her hand curled tightly in mine as the hospital machines hummed and beeped around us like a quiet countdown. She had looked at me then, her eyes glassy but steady. "Promise me you won't let them take advantage of you," she had said, her voice barely audible. "You're too kind, Roy, too generous. You always give and never ask for anything in return. Promise me you'll look after yourself when I'm gone." I promised her, but I didn't keep that promise, did I? Downstairs in the home office where the walls still smelled faintly of varnish and old paperwork, I found the photo album Ellen had kept, the one where she'd saved pictures from the year we built the house. There I was, younger by 25 years and lighter by nearly 50 pounds, planting the foundation with a borrowed crew and a borrowed truck. The spring of '99. A younger man in a sweat-stained t-shirt, eyes full of stubborn hope. Ellen was in the photos too, wearing a construction helmet far too big for her head, smiling as she handed out lemonade to the workers on a scorching June afternoon. Her belly had just started to round out with Caitlin. She glowed. I flipped through the pages slowly, as if each one could somehow bring her back. But it was the financial records from that year that told the real story. The second mortgage, the personal loan I begged from my older brother. Ellen taking on part-time work at the school, tutoring, organizing bake sales, whatever she could manage, just to cover the rising cost of lumber and drywall. We ate beans and rice for weeks, drove a car held together by hope, duct tape, and one working brake pad. But we built this house ourselves, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, sacrifice by sacrifice. It wasn't just a house, it was our life's work, poured into concrete and copper and memory. And now my daughter, the same child who took her first steps on the kitchen tiles, Ellen, and I laid with our bare hands. The little girl who once tumbled through the backyard, I landscaped myself, wants to sell all of it, sell it off, cash it in, and toss me aside like some aging piece of furniture that no longer matches the decor. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and reached for the business card. Todd Fisher, real estate attorney. The edges were frayed from 3 years of sliding around in that drawer, but the ink was still bold, the numbers still legible. Ellen had insisted we meet with him after her diagnosis. Just in case, she'd said. I want to know it's all in order. It had felt premature at the time. Now it felt prophetic. Caitlin and Jeremy think they're dealing with a confused old man, a widower too grateful for their scraps of attention to push back. But they're wrong. They've forgotten who I am. They've forgotten who built all of this and what I'm still capable of. And they're about to remember. They think I'm weak, that I'm too old, too tired, too sentimental to stand my ground, that I'd hand over the work of a lifetime without a single word of protest, that I'd quietly fade into the background like an old piece of wallpaper, yellowed, forgotten, barely noticed. But they're about to find out just how wrong they are. With hands stiff as stone, I dialed the number etched into a business card I'd kept tucked in my desk for 3 years. Todd Fisher, real estate and elder law. The phone rang once, twice, each chime echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. Outside, the spring morning was crisp and clean. That kind of morning Ellen used to love, the kind that felt like the first page of a new chapter. A sky painted in clear blue, birdsong fluttering in through the window screens. She would have called it a hopeful day. Fisher and Associates was located on the second floor of a modest red brick building off Fairfax Avenue. No glass towers or marble lobbies here, just a creaky stairwell, a humble sign on the door, and the faint smell of old books and carpet cleaner. This wasn't the kind of firm trying to impress corporate clients. It was the kind that helped people like me, ordinary men with ordinary lives and complicated, messy problems. The kind Ellen trusted. I wore my best suit, charcoal gray, pressed the night before. The same one Ellen had picked for me to wear at her funeral. She'd said it brought out the blue in my eyes. I arrived 15 minutes early, checked my reflection twice in the lobby mirror. My hands only trembled a little as I signed in at the front desk. Todd Fisher was younger than I expected, early 50s maybe, his hair a salt and pepper blend that looked more distinguished than age-raised. He had the calm, practiced patience of a man who had heard every family tragedy at least twice. Nothing seemed to surprise him anymore, and maybe that's what made him good at what he did. His office was lined with thick law books and framed degrees, but nestled between the certificates were warm touches of a well-loved life. A photo of a woman smiling on a beach, 2 teenagers with braces and wide grins, a golden retriever mid-leap with a tennis ball in its mouth. A normal, happy family, the kind Ellen and I had worked so hard to build, the kind I thought we had. Mr. Hayes, Todd said, standing as I entered. His handshake was firm. It's good to see you again. He moved to the corner of the room and poured coffee from a small machine on a shelf near the window. The scent was rich and bold, comforting in a way I hadn't realized I missed. "I remember you and Ellen from a few years ago," he said gently. "I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how even my voice sounded, surprised that I didn't break. I accepted the cup from him and settled into the chair across from his desk. "I'm here because I need to talk to you about something delicate," I said. "It's about my daughter and her husband." Todd nodded and reached for a notepad and pen. He didn't interrupt, just waited, poised, ready. "I'm listening," he said. So I told him everything about the overheard phone call, the late-night whispers I wasn't meant to hear, the talk of selling my house behind my back, of sending me to a care facility I'd never even heard of. The way they looked at this home, not as a legacy, but as an asset to liquidate. I told him how I'd paid every bill, held up every corner of their world when they couldn't carry their own weight, how I'd sacrificed without ever asking for repayment, and how they mistook my silence for surrender. I watched Todd's expression change, subtle but unmistakable. He'd seen this before. Not the same names, not the same faces, but the same betrayal. The kind that cuts deeper because it comes from the people you love the most. Todd's expression didn't change, but I saw the subtle shake of his head as I described their eagerness, no, their hunger, to cash in on the dreamstone house they talked about like it was a foregone conclusion. "I hate to say it, Mr. Hayes," he said at last, setting his pen down and leaning back in his chair, "but this kind of situation is more common than you'd think. Grown children often assume they know what's best for their aging parents, especially when it comes to valuable property." He paused, gave me a knowing look. "But the truth is they don't have any real power. Not legally." I said nothing, just let his words settle into the space between us. "Let's start with the basics," Todd continued. "The house has been in your name solely since your wife passed, correct?" "Yes," I nodded. "Ellen and I owned it jointly. When she died, ownership transferred entirely to me." "Then legally," Todd said with finality, "your daughter and son-in-law have zero ownership over your property. They can't sell it. They can't force you into a care facility. They can't make any decisions about your estate without your clear, written consent." He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, and began scribbling some notes. "This house is yours, period." For a brief moment, I felt a strange, unfamiliar rush of relief, a weight lifting, but it was quickly followed by something sharper, anger. "So if I wanted to sell it myself," I asked, "I could list it tomorrow." Todd looked up, his pen hovering over the paper. "Absolutely. It's your asset, your decision." Then he paused again. "May I ask what's pushing you to consider that option?" I thought of Caitlin's voice on the phone, cold, clipped, laughing. I thought of Jeremy's spreadsheet, the way he spoke of me like I was an outdated appliance taking up space in the garage. I thought of 25 years of sacrifice, of pouring myself into every beam, every wall, every brick of that house, being reduced to a real estate transaction. "They think I'm confused." "Powerless," I said, fingers tightening around the warm ceramic of the coffee cup. "They think they can manage me, like I'm a problem to be solved." Todd nodded slowly, eyes narrowing with understanding. "Well, Mr. Hayes," Woody said, folding his hands, "the housing market in Denver is red hot right now, especially in your neighborhood. Homes are selling in days, often for cash, over asking price." He flipped to a map and circled an area. "If you were serious about selling, and we found the right buyer, and there are plenty of investors looking for properties like yours, we could close within a week, maybe less." Todd leaned forward across the desk. His voice was calm, careful. "But I have to ask, Mr. Hayes, this is a big decision. Once the house is sold, there's no going back." I looked him in the eye. "I built that house with my own 2 hands, Mr. Fisher. Every board, every nail, every custom cabinet. I know exactly what I'm doing." He studied me for a long beat. Then he nodded. We spent the next hour going over the practical steps, market value estimates, legal requirements, cash buyer networks, timelines. He never once pushed me, never once asked me if I was sure, because he could tell I was. Todd assured me he could have everything in place within 24 hours, every detail handled, from the initial paperwork to the property valuation to the final contracts. If, as he said, I was truly ready to proceed. The consultation fee is $200, he added, his voice calm, almost apologetic, as I rose from the chair. But if you decide to move forward, we'll apply it toward the total legal costs of the sale. No obligation, but we don't waste time here. I reached into my wallet, pulled out the bills, and handed them to him without hesitation. No questions, no second thoughts, just the steady realization that, for the first time in months, maybe years, my mind wasn't fogged with grief or uncertainty. It was clear, sharp, anchored in purpose. There was something sacred in that moment. Not loud, not triumphant, just quiet certainty. The sensation of reclaiming something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. As I stepped out of the modest brick office and into the crisp light of the Denver spring, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face. The air was fresh, humming faintly with the scent of thawed earth and new beginnings. Then, buzz, a soft vibration against my hip. I pulled out my phone. Caitlin. Her name lit up on the screen in clean white text, and instead of the usual twinge of dread or guilt, I felt something different. I smiled. Not a kind smile, not a forgiving one. A private smile held tightly in place by restraint and resolve. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I could almost see her now, standing in some upscale hotel lobby in Phoenix, latte in hand, tapping her manicured nail on the marble check-in counter, brow furrowed just enough to feign concern. I imagined her looking at her phone, then Jeremy, then back again, puzzled that her grateful old dad hadn't picked up on the first ring like usual. Let her puzzle over it. Let her stew in the silence. Let her run through every possible scenario in that polished, scheming little mind. Let her believe for a few moments longer that she and Jeremy were still in control. That I was still the old man they could herd quietly into the background of their lives. They were wrong. So terribly, dangerously wrong. They were about to find out what it truly meant to underestimate a man who had built his entire life with his own hands, one board, one nail, one calloused finger at a time. A man they thought too tired, too confused, too grief-stricken to resist. A man who had nothing left to lose, except the illusion that he owed them anything. The phone was still ringing as I climbed into the truck. I let it. Todd Fisher's business card was already nestled securely in my wallet, and in my mind, something had begun to take shape. Not rage, not revenge. Something cleaner than that. A design, a plan, sharp-edged, cold steel steady, a plan to remind my daughter exactly who I was and who I had never stopped being. I had built my life from nothing, and I could tear it all down and rebuild it again, brick by brick, without her, without Jeremy, without anyone else who thought they could decide what I should do next. Eventually, the phone stopped ringing, but I knew that she'd call again. She always called again, especially when she needed something. Only this time, she was going to get far more than she bargained for. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, my hands no longer trembled on the wheel. The unsteadiness that had dogged me for months had vanished like frost under morning light. Todd Fisher's words echoed again in my head. It's your property. Your decision. 25 years of quiet compromise, of slow-burning sacrifices made without complaint. Gone. Dissolved. I could almost see them lifting off me in wisps, like steam rising from warm pavement after rain. I walked up the front steps with more certainty than I'd felt since Ellen's funeral. Each step forward felt like a small reclaiming of my home, my dignity, my identity. I was just slipping my key into the front door when I heard the soft, familiar buzz from inside. The phone again. Through the window, I saw it lighting up where I'd left it on the kitchen counter. Caitlin, glowing across the screen once more like some kind of preordained test of will. I watched it vibrate, once, twice, then I smiled again. That same knowing smile. Let her stew, let her twist, let her wait. I poured myself a glass of water, cold from the tap, grounding, and took a long, deep breath before I crossed the kitchen floor and answered on the 6th ring. Dad, there you are, Caitlin burst out, her voice bright and falsely cheery. It had that shine to it, like a showroom car, glossy, polished, and soulless underneath. I was getting worried when you didn't answer earlier. Sorry, sweetheart, I replied, my voice low, steady, disarmingly warm. Just running a few errands. I leaned against the counter and let her talk. Oh, no worries, she chirped. Phoenix is great. You know how these conferences go, same speeches, same people. But listen, I have amazing news. She paused, milking the suspense like a magician before the final card reveal. I could almost hear the calculation in her breath. Jeremy and I have been planning something really special for you. My grip on the phone tightened. The edge of the countertop dug into my palm, grounding me in the moment. We wanted to gift you a vacation, she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. You've been through so much since Mom passed. You deserve to relax, to be taken care of. There it was, that subtle twist in her tone. Not kindness, not love. Control, dressed up in soft vowels and strategic pauses. There's this beautiful place we found, she continued. It's like a resort, really, with gardens and pools and nice staff. But it also has medical professionals on site, just in case. A resort with medical staff. I let the words hang in the air between us. So this was it. This was the soft sell. The brochure version of abandonment. The gift of being tucked away, out of sight, out of mind, out of their lives so they could get on with theirs. And she expected me to thank her for it. I clenched my jaw so tight I half expected to feel a crack in my molars. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, I managed, each word tasting like rust. You really didn't have to go through all this trouble for me. A lie, of course she did. She had to. This wasn't kindness, it was calculation cloaked in warmth and sugar-coated concern. It's what families do, Jeremy's voice floated in, smooth and smug from the speakerphone. He was there, of course he was, always hovering just behind her voice, whispering instructions like a director feeding lines to an actor who didn't quite know her role. We've already made all the arrangements, he added, with that false finality people use when they think they've won. I swallowed a bitter laugh. All set, huh? I said casually, letting my voice ride the surface like a leaf over black water. But beneath that, a storm was rolling in. They weren't just planning a vacation. They were evacuating me, sweeping me out like unwanted dust before they came back to sort through what was left. The house, the land, my memories, my bones, if I stayed still long enough. We'll be flying back next Friday, Caitlin chirped, chipper as springtime. We hope you'll be ready by then. Just pack a small bag, some clothes, personal items, the essentials. The essentials, not the albums Ellen spent years arranging. Each page a story, each note in the margins a whisper from a quieter, happier life. Not the rocking chair I built the year Caitlin was born. The one Ellen refused to part with even when it started to creak like old bones. Not the wind chimes Ellen hung from the porch or the quilt she sewed through her last winter. No, none of that was essential. Just a few shirts, a toothbrush, a handful of pills. The starter kit for a quiet death. And they expected me to thank them for it. Actually, Caitlin, I said, voice calm, too calm, like the hush before a storm. Your mother has a surprise for you when you get back. There was a pause, half a breath. Maybe she was searching my tone for some hint of sarcasm, some sign I wasn't playing along. Then she brightened. Oh? What kind of surprise, Dad? Her voice sparkled with hope, probably picturing documents signed, keys handed over, me sitting quietly somewhere sterile and manageable. I walked toward the arched window, the one I built for Ellen with my own hands. She used to say it made the house feel like it was smiling. I looked out over the garden she once nurtured from bare soil, the porch swing where we mapped out decades of tomorrows like we had all the time in the world. I pressed a hand to the cool glass and said softly, "It's something you've been working toward since our last conversation. I think you'll be very surprised." There was another pause, slightly heavier this time. "Oh, Dad, you're so sweet," Caitlin said. A little too brightly, a little too fast. "We'll talk about everything when we get home." "All right," I said, letting the warmth in my voice return. Fake warmth, but she'd never know. You get some rest. Everything else can wait. Sweet. She called me sweet, as if I didn't know what she was doing, as if I hadn't heard the condescension beneath her concern, the greed wrapped in soft tones and strategic smiles. She thought she was being clever. She thought I'd just nod along, fold myself away, and vanish. I'll do that, sweetheart. Love you. Love you too. See you Friday. The line went dead. I held the phone a moment longer, fingers tight around the edges. Then I set it down, gently, like laying down the first domino in a long, calculated line. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, my hands didn't shake. I turned and walked to my home office. The floor creaked under my steps, familiar and solid, like an old friend reminding me I was still here. I opened the laptop. The screen blinked to life, illuminating my face in the dim room like a doorway just cracked open. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Real estate agents, Denver." The results came fast and loud, crowding the screen with names and slogans and business photos with two white teeth. To someone else, it might look like a list of options. To me, it was ammunition. Names I would load like bullets, plans I would aim like weapons, allies I would enlist in a battle they never expected me to fight. I'd always been meticulous. 25 years as a structural engineer taught me to trust the process. Measure twice, cut once, never guess when you could calculate. Tonight, that training would serve a new purpose. I clicked through listings, comparing sales data and client reviews with the same precision I used when evaluating bids for steel trusses or foundation materials. This wasn't sentiment anymore. This was strategy, because they weren't just coming for my house, they were coming for my life. And I was done letting them write the ending. Cherry Hills, Highlands Ranch, University Hills, neighborhoods where houses sold for the kind of money Caitlin and Jeremy used to whisper about late at night. Their voices wrapped in dreams and dollar signs, places that once seemed worlds away from reach. But now they were right there, one phone call away. One name kept surfacing at the top of every search result, like a buoy bobbing confidently in a sea of uncertainty. Brian Connor, age 43, specialist in fast home sales. Average turnaround, 18 days from listing to closing. His photo showed the smile of someone who had never missed a deadline. White teeth, neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that said, "Trust me, I've done this 100 times and I never lose." And the testimonials? Exactly what I needed to see. Brian sold our home in 6 days. We had 3 cash offers within 48 hours. No drama, no delays, just results. He understood that we didn't have time for games. We were out in less than 2 weeks with more than we'd hoped for. I stared at the bold font beneath his glowing credentials. Direct line 303-555-0199. It felt like looking down the barrel of a starting pistol. Finger curled, breath held, the air electric with the knowledge that once I pulled the trigger, everything would change. One phone call, and I would no longer be the grateful, obedient old man my daughter expected. No more fragile sighs and polite nods. No more waiting quietly for my life to be packed away in boxes I didn't get to label. On the desk beside my laptop sat a framed photo of Ellen, her smile gentle, her eyes bright with the kind of kindness that never needed words. It had been over a year, and somehow her presence still lingered like perfume after the person had gone. Watching me, maybe even warning me. "Roy," I could almost hear her say, "Are you sure about this?" And I was. I was more sure of this than I had been of anything since the moment they closed her casket. I reached for the phone, steady now, no shaking, no second thoughts. My thumb hovered for only a second, then pressed. Ring, ring, a voice crisp and direct answered. "Brian Connor, Connor Real Estate. How can I help you today?" I cleared my throat. "Mr. Connor, my name is Roy Hayes. I want to sell my house. Quickly." How fast can something like this actually happen? His tone didn't miss a beat. Professional, confident. "Well, Mr. Hayes, that depends on a few variables. But with the right pricing strategy, and if your property's in good shape, I've closed in as little as 10 days with a cash buyer." 10 days. My heart skipped like a record hit by a sudden jolt. 10 days? Could it really happen that fast? I'm listening, I said. He continued. Denver's market is hot right now, especially in well-maintained neighborhoods. Inventory is low. Buyers are hungry. If your home's move-in ready, we could have serious interest within 48 hours. I looked around the kitchen, really seeing it for the first time. Not as a space filled with memories, but as someone else might see it. The polished oak cabinets, the tiled backsplash I installed the summer Caitlin left for college. The dent in the refrigerator door Ellen used to complain about but never wanted to fix. It gives it character, she said. Can you tell me a little bit about the house? Brian asked. I exhaled slowly, eyes drifting across the space that had once felt eternal. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of letting go. I built it myself, I said, 32 years ago. Every wall, every nail, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, hardwood floors, a backyard garden my wife planted before she passed. There was a short pause on his end. Then with sincerity in his voice, he said, That sounds like a beautiful home, Mr. Hayes. Let's make sure it goes to someone who'll love it just as much. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to do. Not for Caitlin, not for Jeremy, for Ellen, for me, and for the man I refused to let fade away in a quiet room with neutral walls and daily medication schedules. Because this wasn't surrender. This was the beginning. The house was 2 stories tall, 3,400 square feet of memories and meticulous labor, roughly 360 square meters, for those who'd measured differently. Built in 1990, nestled in the heart of Cherry Creek, it had 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and the kind of craftsmanship that came from love, not just blueprints. I've kept it in excellent shape, I told Brian. Done most of the work myself over the years. There was a shift in his voice, sudden sharpness, the sound of a professional catching the scent of opportunity. That sounds exactly like what some of my investors are looking for. Original owner, well-maintained property in an established neighborhood. Those are premium selling points. He was already mentally writing the listing. I could hear it in his cadence. Would you like to get the property appraised? How soon could you come by? I asked. There was a beat, then brisk confidence. I could be there this afternoon if that works for you. Say around 3 o'clock? I glanced at the clock above the stove. Just past noon. 3 o'clock is perfect. Let me give you the address. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen, now steeped in an unnatural silence. The kind that follows after a stone has been thrown into water. But just before the ripples begin to show. In 3 hours, a stranger would walk through the home that Ellen and I built piece by piece. And he would put a price tag on every memory we had ever made. The countertop she picked, the window nook where she sipped morning tea, the creaky stair she never wanted fixed because it lets me know you're coming. He would tally those up like assets on a spreadsheet, and I had agreed to it. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning, not just tidying, but scrubbing, polishing, dusting, the way Ellen would have wanted. She had been obsessive about the house looking immaculate for any guest, even the mailman. I straightened every throw pillow, wiped down every baseboard, even realigned the chairs around the dining table until they looked like they belonged in a magazine. But it felt different this time. This wasn't hospitality. This felt like preparing for an execution. Not of a man, but of a life. Our life. At precisely 3:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. I smoothed the front of my shirt, the faint lavender scent from Ellen's old linen sachets still clinging to the fabric. I had kept them in the storage chest unopened for over a year, but today I needed her near. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the brass doorknob, the one I installed myself 15 years ago, swearing under my breath the entire time because I couldn't get the screws to align properly. Ellen had laughed at me the whole afternoon, brought me iced tea, and told me to pretend the doorknob is a stubborn idea. And now that same doorknob sat beneath my palm, cold, gleaming, and unknowing. Behind this door waited either salvation or ruin. Maybe both. I turned the knob and opened the door to my future. Brian Connor looked exactly like his photo, professional, approachable, early 40s, with the relaxed confidence of a man who had negotiated too many deals to count. In one hand, he carried a sleek leather portfolio. in the other, a tablet, the tools of his trade. And then he stepped inside. His eyes widened. "Wow," he murmured. He paused in the entryway, taking it all in. His gaze lingered on the detailed crown molding I had installed by hand, on the hardwood floors Ellen and I had chosen after a month of looking at samples. She had wanted walnut. I wanted oak. We compromised naturally with mahogany. "Mr. Hayes," he said, shaking his head slightly, impressed. "This is exactly what I was hoping for." He wasn't faking it. I could see that. He was looking at the house not just as a listing, but as something rare, something real. I watched as he moved carefully, respectfully, through the space, his eyes scanning every line and curve. The late afternoon light poured through the bay window Ellen had loved so much, casting golden warmth across the floor. This was the house where we planned to grow old together, but only one of us got the chance. And now the other had to make sure her home went to someone who would respect its story, even if they never knew it. The seamless flow from the living room into the dining area was something I had created myself, by tearing down a load-bearing wall and installing a support beam. It had taken weeks of calculation, caution, and sweat, but it had opened the space beautifully, giving Ellen the airy, sunlit room she had always dreamed of. Brian noticed. His appreciation was both professional and genuine. There was no flattery in his tone, no patronizing nods, just the respectful acknowledgement of hard work well done. He pulled out his tablet and began taking photos, capturing the light as it spilled across the floorboards. "These hardwoods," he asked, running a hand along the grain, "are they original?" "They are," I said. "I installed them myself in 2001. "Seriously?" He turned to look at me. I nodded. Ellen wanted something that would last, so we went with 3/4-inch solid oak. Not engineered, not laminate, the real thing. Brian let out a low whistle, nodding with approval. Beautiful choice. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself slip into the old rhythm, the pride, the comfort of talking shop with someone who understood the value of what had been done right. No mention of betrayal, no talk of nursing homes, just the quiet validation of a man who could still build something worth admiring. "In the kitchen?" Brian asked, stepping into the space where so many memories had been cooked into every surface. He paused at the granite countertops, trailing his fingers slowly along the polished edge. "Custom installed, down to the inch." I swallowed hard. "Ellen chose the pattern," I said softly. Said the gold veining reminded her of sunlight. My voice caught in my throat. I could still see her leaning over that slab of stone in the showroom, pressing her fingertips against the swirl like she could hold on to the warmth. I spent 3 weekends measuring, cutting, setting everything in place. Brian nodded, tapping notes into his tablet, taking photos of the custom cabinetry, testing water pressure at the sink, checking electrical outlets with the quiet focus of someone who knew exactly what his clients expected. "Mr. Hayes," he said, looking up from his screen, "I have to be honest with you, in 15 years of doing this, I've rarely seen a property maintained to this level." I felt something stir in me, not pride, not quite, but maybe a flicker of dignity I hadn't felt in months. "I'm an engineer," I said, "used to be anyway. I believe in building things right, from the foundation up." He smiled. "It shows." He gestured toward the living room. "May I?" I nodded, following him as he crossed into the space Ellen and I had poured ourselves into. He paused to take in the built-in bookshelves flanking the fireplace, the open lines of the architecture, the personal touches that turned blueprints into belonging. "This arched window," I said quietly, stepping beside him. "It was custom designed for my wife. She wanted a little reading nook." I could still see her there, legs curled beneath her, paperback mystery novel in one hand, tea in the other. Her reading glasses slipping down her nose, her expression completely lost in whatever world she had entered. Brian stepped forward, holding up the tablet to get a wide shot. His face lit up with enthusiasm, eyebrows raised in silent approval. "Mr. Hayes, I need to show you some comparable listings," he said. He swiped a few times on his screen, then turned it toward me. A row of homes appeared, similar size, style, location. "Properties like yours in this neighborhood have been selling between $850,000 and $920,000, he said. I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. That was higher than anything Caitlin and Jeremy had guessed during that venom-laced conversation they thought I hadn't heard. But, Brian continued, considering the condition of your home, the upgrades, the finishes, and the uniqueness of the layout, I think we should list it at $890,000. High enough to reflect its worth, low enough to move fast. $890,000. The number rang in my ears like the low toll of a distant bell. That wasn't just equity, that was our life measured in dollars and decimals. That was Ellen's sunrise granite, my weekends with power tools, the holidays, the arguments, the reconciliations. The dreams we never got around to chasing. All of it, now summarized in one sleek, professional figure. Okay, I said, quieter than I intended. Okay, Brian smiled. I'll get started on the paperwork. We can be live by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Everything was changing, and this time I was the one turning the key. I sank heavily into Ellen's reading chair, the one under the arched window she had loved so much, as if the weight of the number, 890,000, had physically knocked the air out of me. The figure spun in my head like a carousel I couldn't get off. Really? I finally managed to say. Brian didn't miss a beat. Mr. Hayes, you're sitting on a gold mine. Properties like this, especially in this condition, almost never come on the market anymore. His voice held the steady confidence of someone who wasn't just trying to make a sale. He knew the market, understood the buyers, and spoke like someone who had already connected the dots in his mind. In fact, he added, I have an investment group actively looking for exactly this type of property. What kind of group? I asked. They specialize in high-end rentals, well-maintained homes in stable neighborhoods. They pay cash, no financing contingencies, no repair negotiations, no delays. If they like what they see, we can close in 10 business days. 10 business days. Caitlin and Jeremy were flying in from Phoenix in 8, expecting to find their docile, grateful old father, suitcase packed, ready to be ushered off to some resort-style care facility. And instead, they had found a man who had already sold the house out from under their plans. What's the rush? I asked, more to myself than to him. Brian smiled. There's no rush, Mr. Hayes. There's clarity. Cash means no mortgage slowdowns, no appraisal snafus. These buyers do their own inspections. But frankly, your house is in better shape than most new builds I've seen. I glanced around the living room, the same room where Caitlin took her first wobbly steps, where Ellen and I had hosted Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, Sunday afternoons with newspapers spread wide and jazz humming low. Every inch of it still felt like us. When would I need to move out? I asked. Standard contract gives you 30 days after closing, Brian said, but my clients are flexible. If you need more time, they'll accommodate. That gave me pause. I thought about the deed, the paperwork, the process of untangling 25 years of life into signatures and sealed envelopes. I thought about Caitlin's voice, saccharine sweet over the phone while plotting my quiet removal. I thought about Jeremy's spreadsheets and cost-benefit charts, calculating my life into columns of liability. And I thought about Ellen's voice, soft but firm. Roy, don't be too generous. Don't be too trusting. Let's do it, I said, almost surprised by how certain I felt. For a brief second, the polished mask slipped from Brian's face, and pure excitement shone through. He looked like a man who had just struck oil. Great choice, Mr. Hayes. I'll call them right now. I watched him pace lightly across my hardwood floor, phone pressed to his ear, describing my home with the exhilaration of someone who had just uncovered a buried treasure. Cherry Creek area, original owner, pristine condition, custom features throughout. He ended the call with a triumphant grin. They're in. They want to move forward immediately. He tucked his phone into his coat. I can have the initial paperwork ready for review by tomorrow morning. The sun was sinking low outside Ellen's window, casting golden rays across the room, the same room where I had just agreed to sell away 25 years of our life together. But strangely, for the first time since that fateful phone call from Caitlin, I didn't feel panic or guilt or grief. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. How does 9 a.m. sound? Brian asked, his words hanging in the warm air like the curl of cigarette smoke, waiting for a reply that might change everything. In the hallway, the grandfather clock Ellen gave me for our 15th wedding anniversary ticked gently into the silence. 9 a.m. sounds perfect, I said. After Brian left, full of promises and next steps, I stood alone in a house that would soon no longer be mine. The evening light spilled across the floor like a photograph of my life, one I was almost ready to tuck into an album and shelve. But what surprised me most wasn't the ache of impending loss. It was the thrill of what came next. The following morning, right on time, Brian returned, armed with contracts, a notary public, and coffee for everyone. Efficient, focused, exactly the kind of professionalism I'd always admired. And just like that, my old life began to turn its final page. I read every line of the contract with the same meticulous attention that had made me a good engineer, checking the fine print in the way I once checked blueprints, detail by detail. Sale price, $890,000, cash purchase. Closing date, 10 business days from signing. The notary, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, guided me through each signature with patient clarity. There were few complications, a simple title search, a final walkthrough, and the understanding that I could remain in the house for up to 30 days after the sale if needed. Yes, I thought, he's really paying for it. Most sellers, she explained, prefer to move out sooner than later. For peace of mind. Peace of mind. I almost laughed out loud. The only peace I would get was seeing Caitlin and Jeremy's faces when they realized the burden they thought they had to manage had made a move of its own. One they hadn't planned for. I signed my name with a steady hand, and just like that, it was done. The first 3 days passed in a blur of paperwork and inspections. The title company combed through decades of records. The investment group sent in a team, polite, efficient, almost reverent as they moved through the house. Your father-in-law really knew what he was doing, one of them said to an heir, assuming I was already out of the picture. These floors, the wiring, top-notch stuff. From day 4 to 6, I became a man with a quiet mission. I searched listings online, scanning for something small but comfortable. A place I could start over with nearly $900,000 in the bank. Something manageable, modest, my own. I found a promising option in Highlands, a retirement community with a golf course and a bustling rec center. The kind of place Ellen and I used to half joke about moving to someday during our golden years. A place with quiet mornings, crossword puzzles, maybe even Tai Chi if I was feeling brave. I also made calls to storage units and moving services, mapping out what I would keep and what I would leave for the new owners. Ellen's china set, her jewelry box, of course, our photo albums, the few things that weren't just keepsakes, but reminders of the life we'd built. The rest, let it stay. A house like this needed memories to hold it up, and the new owners would have plenty of room to make their own. Days 7 through 9 brought with them a strange kind of confidence, one I hadn't felt in years. Each morning I woke knowing I was one step closer to freedom, one step closer to showing my daughter that her confused old father might be far sharper than she ever imagined. Even Mrs. Patterson next door noticed the change. She peered over the hedge one afternoon, a curious glint in her eyes. "So, are those inspectors? City officials?" she asked, motioning toward the suits who'd come and gone all week. "Just some work being done," I replied, hating the half-truth, but knowing full well the real story would spread across the neighborhood long before I had the chance to shape it. By day 8, Brian called with the final confirmation. "Everything's on track to close tomorrow, Mr. Hayes," he said. The buyers were thrilled with the inspection results. "The wire transfer will go through that same day. You'll have immediate access to the funds." That night, I packed a single suitcase, a few changes of clothes, some essentials. Not because I was leaving, not yet, but because I wanted to be ready for anything. I stood in my closet, eyes on the photo of Ellen, framed in soft silver and tucked next to her lavender sachets. I touched it gently and whispered, "I hope you understand what I'm doing." Friday morning arrived clear and calm, the kind of crisp spring day Ellen used to say made Denver the most beautiful place on earth. I wore my best suit, not the funeral one, but the navy blue suit Ellen had bought me for Caitlin's college graduation. The real estate office looked every bit as professional and efficient as Brian had promised. The buyer's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense air, combed through every document with care. Brian conducted the paperwork like a maestro leading an orchestra. "Mr. Hayes, just your signature here, and here's, then once more down there." Each signature felt like cutting a tether. The deed transfer, the payment records, the final acknowledgement that 1247 Maple Street no longer belonged to Roy Hayes. "And this," Brian said, handing me a page, "is your wire confirmation. $890,000 minus closing costs has been deposited into your account." I stared at the numbers on the paper, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. More than Caitlin and Jeremy ever imagined they'd manage on my behalf. We shook hands, all parties satisfied with the clean, swift transaction. Brian walked me to my truck, promising to stay in touch should I ever need real estate services again. "You made the right call, Mr. Hayes. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what we need." I drove home, passing streets and houses that had been part of my life for 25 years. Past the elementary school where Caitlin had learned to read. Past the park where Ellen and I used to walk every quiet Sunday morning. But I didn't feel nostalgic. I felt released. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck, staring at the house that was no longer mine. The front door key rested heavy in my palm. Tomorrow I would hand it over and close the chapter. Caitlin and Jeremy would return from Phoenix in 3 days. They'd arrive expecting to find a grateful, compliant father, ready to be escorted to a retirement facility. Instead, they'd find an empty house and a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. I climbed out of the truck and walked toward the front door, reaching for my phone to make the next call in a plan unfolding better than I ever could have hoped. The engine ticked as it cooled in the driveway, but I couldn't shut it off yet. I just sat there, staring at the house I had built with my own hands. A house that now belonged to strangers. The same house Caitlin and Jeremy expected to return to, imagining a grateful, compliant father waiting to be escorted away. The front door key felt like lead in my palm. The house may have a new owner, but I still had 30 days to come and go, time enough to finish what I had started. I drove to the Starbucks off K-Fax and parked in the lot, keeping my hands steady as I dialed the 24/7 locksmith hotline. The emergency fee would run me an extra $200, but money was no longer an issue. "ABA Emergency Locksmith, this is Eddie. I need all the locks on my house changed today. It's urgent." "How much time do we have, sir?" "As soon as humanly possible. I can pay in cash. I can be there within 2 hours. What's the address?" Back at the house, I waited in the truck, watching Mrs. Patterson water her garden next door. She waved. I waved back, my chest tightening at the lie I was telling everyone who cared about me. Eddie arrived in a van crammed with tools and hardware. A man in his 50s, clearly no stranger to lock-related emergencies in Denver. "Security concerns, sir?" he asked, already eyeing the front door. "New ownership situation. Better safe than sorry." He nodded like he'd heard it before, then got to work. I watched him remove the locks I had installed 15 years ago, solid brass hardware Ellen had picked out because it matched our door knocker. "Good locks," Eddie muttered mid-task. Somebody knew what they were doing when they installed these. "That was me," I said quietly. "I like things done right." The new locks were silver instead of brass, modern instead of classic. They clicked differently. A sharp mechanical sound. As Eddie tested each one, "Here are your new keys, sir, 3 copies of each. The front door, the back door, and the garage entrance. 3 points of entry, 3 places I had secured and unlocked 1,000 times in my life. Now rekeyed, wiped clean of familiarity." Eddie dropped a small bundle of unfamiliar keys into my hand. They felt foreign, sharp, cold. Not just because they were new, but because they marked a threshold I had quietly crossed. "That'll be $450, he said, not counting the emergency service fee. I didn't hesitate. I reached into my wallet, peeled off the bills, and paid in cash. There would be no receipt, no paper trail, nothing that tied Roy Hayes to this final act of quiet rebellion. And then he was gone. The house fell silent in a way I had never heard before. Even when Ellen passed, even in the loneliest hours of the night, The home still breathed with our memories. But now it was just wood and drywall and echoes. I stood in the entryway, the same spot where Caitlin had run to me with finger paintings, where Ellen had once stood laughing in a summer dress where I'd taken off my muddy work boots 1,000 evenings, and I let the stillness wash over me. This was the hardest part, not the paperwork, not the legal maneuvering, but packing up 25 years of life into a few bags that I could lift alone. I started with Ellen's jewelry box. It was small, lined with faded velvet, and still carried the faintest trace of her favorite lavender oil. Next came our wedding photo, her eyes forever captured mid-laugh, a curl of her hair escaping the pins, the happiest day of my life. Then the novel she'd left unfinished on her nightstand. I'd never moved it. The bookmark was still tucked in at page 247. She would have hated leaving a story unresolved. Now I would carry it forward for her. I added my engineering certificate, some old but essential documents, and her worn cookbook, the one with gravy stains and penciled-in adjustments scribbled in the margins. Use less salt. Roy likes more garlic. Double this for guests. Everything else? I left behind. The furniture we picked together. The creaky rocking chair in the den where she used to sip tea. The dining table where we'd once hosted friends and later just sat in the quiet. The photo albums Caitlin used to love flipping through, her little hands pointing at faces she barely remembered. The hallway where her growth chart was penciled into the trim, still faintly visible beneath the paint. And Ellen's clothes, still hanging neatly in the closet, still scented with her, still too sacred to touch. While packing, I called Sunset Manor Apartments. I told the woman on the line that I needed a furnished one-bedroom unit immediately. "We have a lovely unit available," she said. Her voice was warm, efficient. "It's clean, fully equipped. Month-to-month lease. If you need flexibility, I'm happy to approve it." Her name was Mrs. Chen. I met her just an hour later. The building wasn't flashy, but it was neat, well kept, designed for seniors like me. The grounds were trimmed, the community center lit warmly from within. It looked like the kind of place Ellen would have called charming. The apartment itself was modest. One bedroom, a small kitchen, just enough room to breathe, and just enough room to start over. "Cash deposit is perfectly fine, Mr. Hayes. When would you like to move in?" "Tonight." Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. She didn't press me for a story. I was grateful for that. I signed the lease, paid the first month's rent in the deposit, nearly $3,000, a sum that, not long ago, I would have agonized over. But now it felt like liberation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I loaded my few boxes into the car. The evening air was cool and still. Orange light spilled across the pavement like a quiet blessing. I glanced up and saw Mrs. Patterson peeking out from behind her curtain across the street. She didn't wave this time. She just watched, uncertain. Maybe she sensed something had shifted. Maybe she would tell the others that Roy Hayes had done something unexpected. And maybe for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. She waved again, and I felt the full weight of every relationship I was severing. Every bond that Caitlin and Jeremy had in their own quiet ways pressured me to let go of. I walked through the house one last time, the empty rooms echoing with each step. The acoustics had changed. Even my footsteps sounded foreign now that the house belonged to someone else. In the kitchen, where Ellen once taught Caitlin how to bake Christmas cookies. In the living room where we unwrapped presents together on Christmas mornings. In the bedroom where Ellen took her last breath while I held her hand. "I'm sorry, my love," I said aloud to Ellen, "but you'd understand. You always said I was too generous for my own good." I locked the new deadbolt and drove away from Maple Street, perhaps for the very last time. In my rearview mirror, I saw the life I'd left behind, full of laughter, pain, love, and all the little rituals that made us a family. By the time I reached Sunset Manor, the sun had disappeared, and my car was packed with the bare essentials of a life reduced to what mattered most. I carried my suitcase to the new front door, fumbling with unfamiliar keys and unfamiliar locks. Inside, the apartment was functional, clean, and cold. It smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner, a scent that didn't belong to anyone or anything. I set the suitcase down, then immediately reached for my phone. There was one final phase to my plan, and it required another phone call. One last puzzle piece to slide into place. One final twist that would give Caitlin and Jeremy a surprise they'd never forget. The apartment looked like a budget hotel room. Livable but lifeless. Muted furniture, sterile walls, an anonymous space without history. The kind of place designed to house someone, not to hold memories. Ellen's photo was already placed carefully on the nightstand, her eyes smiling back at me, as if offering silent approval. I stood there holding the phone, thinking about how best to protect the nearly $900,000 from two children who believed they were entitled to it. Not because they were cruel, but because they had stopped seeing me as a person. Just a responsibility. A problem to solve. I opened my laptop on the small dining table and began researching private banks that specialized in high-value accounts. Institutions that would guard my fortune like a fortress, the kind that didn't answer to anyone but me. Tomorrow, I'd vanish from the life they thought they understood. And perhaps for the first time, I'd live it on my terms. The Colorado Community Bank caught my attention. Smaller than the big-name chains, focused on personalized service and discretion. Exactly what I needed. Colorado Community Bank, Private Banking Division. This is David Morrison speaking. Mr. Morrison, my name is Roy Hayes. I need to open an account with a sizable deposit, around $890,000. There was a brief pause on the other end, just long enough to tell me David was mentally rearranging his day. We'd be honored to work with you, Mr. Hayes. When would you be available for a consultation? Monday morning, 9 a.m. Perfect. I'll have everything ready. The weekend stretched before me like unfamiliar territory. I had never lived anywhere but the home Ellen and I built together. This small apartment felt like exile, but exile of my own choosing. My choice, not theirs. On Saturday morning, I brewed coffee in a kitchen that still didn't feel like mine, carefully arranging what few possessions I'd brought with me. Ellen's jewelry box on the closet shelf, my engineering award on the bookshelf, our wedding photo next to the bed, a bed I would now sleep in, alone in a space that had never known Ellen's laughter or warmth. I drove to the grocery store and shopped for one. Simple meals, no elaborate recipes like Ellen used to love. The cashier, a soft-spoken young man with kind eyes, asked if I was new in the area. I told him I just moved in, starting over. On Sunday morning, I found a small cafe 3 blocks from my apartment. Brews and Views, it was called. The barista, a young woman named Sarah, with dyed purple hair and a warm smile, brewed a bold cup of coffee, exactly how I liked it. You new around here? She asked, not probing, just friendly. Retired engineer, I replied, looking for a quieter life. Well, you found the right neighborhood, she said. Most of our regulars are pretty easygoing. I took my coffee and sat by the window, watching people walk their tones, push strollers, go about their ordinary Sunday lives. The kind of peaceful morning Ellen and I used to cherish. But instead of sadness, I felt something unexpected. Something I hadn't felt in months. Anticipation. Monday morning, I put on my best suit and drove to the Colorado Community Bank. David Morrison was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s perhaps, professional but warm, with the kind of calm confidence that made it feel like he'd spent a lifetime safeguarding other people's life savings. Mr. Hayes, what brings you to Colorado Community Bank? He asked. I just sold my house, I said. I need a fresh start, and I'm looking for a place that values personal relationships more than transaction fees. David nodded with what seemed like genuine understanding. We specialize in exactly that kind of service. Tell me what you need. I explained my situation carefully. A widower, having just sold the home I'd shared with my late wife, looking for a secure, discreet banking solution. David asked thoughtful questions, never too probing, just enough to set up the account properly. I'll need to transfer funds from my previous bank, I added. No problem at all, he said. We can initiate the wire today. The money should land by Wednesday. David handled the paperwork efficiently. Online banking, debit card, checks, all standard. Given the size of the deposit, he also recommended their premium account package, which came with enhanced security features. I signed the documents, officially becoming client number 847293 at Colorado Community Bank, with full access to nearly $900,000, a sum Caitlin and Jeremy would never touch. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in the quiet rhythm of a life reassembled. Morning coffee at Brews and Views. Sarah remembered my order now and asked how my weekend had been. I told her it had been productive. She smiled and handed me my coffee without a word. In the afternoons, I wandered the neighborhood. I found a small park tucked between two side streets, where retirees fed pigeons and read newspapers under elm trees. Wednesday afternoon, David called with the confirmation I'd been waiting for. Mr. Hayes, your funds have been successfully transferred. Your account is now fully active. I thanked him and hung up. Then I looked around the small apartment, at the framed photo of Ellen watching me from the nightstand, at the modest life I was building from the rubble of betrayal and grief. For the first time since Ellen passed, I felt like I was truly in control of my own destiny. That evening, I sat in my armchair. Not Ellen's reading chair. Not the old recliner where I'd heard Caitlin's voice speak words I couldn't unhear. Just a plain chair in a plain room that belonged entirely to me. I opened my laptop and typed into the search bar. Mini surveillance cameras. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, knowing full well that what I was about to order would capture the final act of my quiet revenge. Caitlin and Jeremy would return on Friday, expecting to find their grateful old father, docile and compliant, ready to be managed. Instead, they were about to discover that their burden had just become their biggest problem. Search results flooded my screen, rows upon rows of surveillance options, obvious security cams, discreet ones disguised as household objects. After 30 minutes of digging, I found exactly what I needed. A wireless mini camera, cleverly concealed inside what looked like a simple phone charger. It ticked every box on my technical checklist. Wi-Fi enabled with smartphone app control, motion-triggered recording, 12 hours of battery life, and ultra-sharp video resolution. Most importantly, it could stream footage directly to my phone from anywhere with an internet connection. I ordered it with expedited shipping, paying an extra $40 to guarantee Thursday delivery. Total cost, $149. A sum I would have hesitated to spend just 2 weeks ago, but now barely registered. With the camera ordered, I turned to the next crucial piece. The note, the message Caitlin and Jeremy would find when they realized their keys no longer worked. The first draft was too angry, too raw with betrayal. The second, too cold, lacking the personal devastation they had caused. By the third attempt, I found the right tone. Formal yet devastating, loving but final. I wrote it in the meticulous engineer's script Ellen always admired, a hand steady with resolve. Dear Caitlin and Jeremy, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked exactly as intended. I heard your phone call, your casual conversation about placing me in a care home because I was becoming a burden. I heard you calculating how much money you'd make selling my house. Well, the house is sold for $890,000 in cash. That money is now securely held in a new bank account under my name, and it will stay there. I've moved to a place where I am treated with respect, not managed, manipulated, or discarded. Don't worry about me. Worry about your own housing situation. Your belongings have been packed and are currently being stored at Denver Moving and Storage on Kfax Street. You have 30 days to retrieve them before storage fees begin. I gave you everything I had for 42 years. You repaid me by trying to lock me in a closet so you could steal the fruits of my life's labor. I hope this lesson is worth its price. With love, Dad. Thursday morning, the FedEx truck pulled up in front of my apartment and delivered a small box, a nondescript package that held the key to their undoing. I spent the next hour in the kitchen unpacking and testing the device, learning the app, calibrating the motion sensitivity, running tests in different lighting conditions. The video quality was exceptional, and the audio sharp enough to pick up whispered conversations. It was, in every sense, perfect. Thursday afternoon, I drove back to the old house for the very last time. I used the garage opener, the one I never gave to Caitlin and Jeremy. I didn't want the neighbors asking questions about why strangers were coming and going. My hands trembled slightly as I held the new key, approaching the front door. It was absurd, really. I had nothing to fear anymore. But this was still my home. The place I had built a life in. The place I had shared with Ellen. The place they tried to turn into a vault for me. Inside, the familiar scent hit me like a gentle punch to the chest. Ellen's lavender sachets tucked in the linen closets, the lemon oil I used to polish the wooden banisters, the faint traces of 25 years of dinners, laughter, holiday spice, and old floor wax. But there were new smells now, too. Faint, jarring, the sharp chemical tang of Caitlin's hairspray, the too sweet cologne Jeremy favored. The house already felt like it was slipping away from me, and yet still full of ghosts they never noticed. Near the staircase sat their suitcases, neatly stacked like they belonged here, like this was their personal storage unit. Their mail scattered across the kitchen counter. Their carelessness, their assumption of ownership, a quiet, final insult. I set the camera charger down by the front door, plugged it in, angled it just right to capture the entire entryway, including the exact spot where I'd hang my final note. The app on my phone showed a clear live feed of the space. Every shadow, every movement. I tested the motion detection settings, walking in and out of frame until I was certain the system would catch every moment of their return. Then I carefully taped the sealed envelope to the inside of the front door, right at eye level, impossible to miss, waiting for the precise second they walked in and the camera recorded the truth hitting them like a freight train. In the living room, I stood one last time by the mantel, where Ellen's photo had sat for 23 years. Soon the new owners would replace it with pictures of their children, their holidays, their own laughter echoing through the same walls that had once held ours. "It's done, my love," I whispered into the air, my voice unsteady. "Justice has been served." I closed the front door behind me and locked it with the new key. In the car, I checked the live camera feed one last time. The entryway, the envelope, perfectly framed and waiting. Then I pulled away from Maple Street, not with sorrow, but with finality. The motion sensor was armed, the battery at full charge, and my phone rested in my palm, ready to alert me the very second Caitlin and Jeremy realized their keys no longer opened the door they once considered theirs. Back at the apartment, I sank slowly into the old armchair by the window. Phone in hand, my eyes locked onto the grainy yet steady feed from the camera perched silently by the front door of the house I had lived in for over 2 decades. The image was still, empty. The clock at the corner of the app glowed 6:30 p.m. Thursday. The quiet before the reckoning. Tomorrow they'd return from their business trip, probably fresh off conversations about elder care facilities, calculating long-term costs, mentally divvying up furniture and funds that hadn't even been handed to them yet. They had likely already decided where they would move me, how much they could keep, and how quickly it could all be done. They had no idea the grateful old father they thought they could dismiss had taken back his power. That he had been listening, that he had been planning, and that he had nothing left to lose. Friday morning came not with dread, but with a strange electric calm. I rose before the sun had a chance to pierce the blinds, feeling lighter than I had in years, like something ancient had finally been shaken off. For the first time in weeks, my coffee had flavor. I could taste it, deep, nutty, comforting. Even the apartment, usually cramped and heavy with the scent of dust and memory, felt roomier somehow. I sat down in the same chair, phone in hand, camera feed active, still empty. 4:30 p.m., any minute now. I knew them too well. Caitlin always left Phoenix before noon, always, to beat the Friday traffic. Jeremy, rigid as ever, followed the speed limit religiously. That combination had always put them in my driveway between 5 honk and 5:30 p.m. Without fail, I turned my eyes toward the photo on the nightstand. Ellen's soft smile looked back at me from behind the frame. "I hope you understand what I'm doing, sweetheart," I whispered. They left me. They planned to throw me away like I was some old chair in the garage. This is the only thing I could do. 5:15 p.m. The phone buzzed, motion detected. I didn't breathe. A black SUV rolled into the frame. Jeremy's. He always kept it spotless. It glinted under the waning sunlight like a predator approaching unsuspecting prey. Caitlin stepped out first, stretching stiffly, her face shaded by those oversized sunglasses she wore to hide how little she ever really looked at people. Jeremy exited from the driver's seat and retrieved their suitcases from the trunk. They moved like people who owned the place, like people who had already rewritten history in their minds, where they were the loving children, and I was the burdensome relic finally being tucked away. I watched them walk toward the front door with rehearsed ease, talking quietly, perhaps about dinner plans, or the weather in Denver, or how much renovation would cost once the house was fully in their name. Caitlin pulled out her key, the same one I had seen her hang on a hook by her front door countless times. Jeremy stood beside her, setting their luggage down on the front step like it was some triumphant homecoming. She inserted the key. It didn't turn. I could see her brows pull together even from the grainy feed. She tried again, a bit more forcefully this time. Still nothing. "That's weird," she muttered, her voice cracking through the speaker. "My key isn't working." Jeremy stepped closer, fatigue giving way to concern. "Let me try the back door," he said, and without waiting for a reply, disappeared around the side of the house. Caitlin kept jiggling the key, now visibly annoyed. She crouched slightly, as if squinting at the lock would change its betrayal. Her frustration simmered into visible agitation. Jeremy returned a few minutes later, breathing faster. "The back door's locked too," he said, looking rattled, "and the garage remote doesn't work either." There was a pause, then came the panic. "Caitlin," he said slowly, "someone changed the locks." She turned to him sharply. "What? That's impossible. My dad doesn't even know a locksmith." They stood there, bewildered, beginning to realize they were no longer in control, and I sat in my chair watching it all unfold, feeling the tremble of long-suppressed dignity rising quietly inside me, like dawn breaking through a storm. Jeremy leaned in, examining the front door more closely. The sharp mind of a financial advisor kicked in as his eyes narrowed. He saw it instantly. These were brand new locks. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding. This was intentional. Caitlin fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she unlocked the screen. "I'm calling Dad," she said, her voice brittle with rising panic. I watched as she dialed my old landline, the number I had disconnected 3 days ago. She held it to her ear, waiting. 1 ring, 2, 3. Her brow furrowed, her mouth tightening in confusion. No answer, not even voicemail. "Try his cell," Jeremy said. "He doesn't have a cell phone," she snapped. "Remember? We talked about getting him one, for emergencies." Her voice cracked on the word emergencies, the first genuine note of fear creeping in. Jeremy moved quickly now, scanning the side of the house, testing windows, his earlier confidence draining away with each failed attempt. "This one," he said, "it's not locked. I can reach in." Caitlin didn't protest. I watched her awkwardly climb through the open kitchen window I had left unlocked on purpose. Her business suit snagged slightly on the frame, but she didn't stop. A moment later, the front door opened from the inside. Jeremy entered with their luggage, stepping into the place they once believed was theirs. Then they saw it, the white envelope, taped neatly to the door frame at eye level. They froze. Caitlin reached for it, her hands shaking as she pulled it free. Their names were written on it in my careful, familiar handwriting. I leaned forward in my chair, gripping the phone like a lifeline. My breath held as she broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the letter. Jeremy leaned in over her shoulder, reading each word. I watched their faces shift. Confusion first, then disbelief. Then the shock set in, and finally horror. "He sold the house," Caitlin whispered, her voice climbing to a ragged screech. "He actually sold it. How could he do this to us?" Jeremy snatched the letter from her hands, scanning it again, like he could will the words to say something different. "That conniving old bastard," he growled. "He's been playing us this whole time. $890,000. Caitlin burst into tears, the carefully applied makeup on her cheeks running in streaks of black and brown. "That money, that was supposed to be our future." Jeremy's eyes blazed. "Your future?" he snapped, the polite son-in-law mask cracking apart at last. "This is your father, Caitlin. You were supposed to handle this better." "My fault?" She turned on him, eyes wide, the dam of resentment finally breaking. You're the one who said he was becoming a burden. You were the one pushing the nursing home. Well, he was a burden. Look at what he's done to us. Jeremy flailed his arms wildly around the living room, their living room, or at least what used to be theirs. We're homeless, he shouted, his voice raw with disbelief. Our lease is up next week. What the hell are we supposed to do now? I couldn't help but notice the perfect, almost poetic irony of it all. There they were, arguing about homelessness in the very room where they had once plotted to put me away in a nursing home, an institution I was meant to vanish into, quietly, without protest. They had tried to exile me from the life I built, and now they stood on the edge of losing everything they had built on my back. Call the lawyer, Caitlin said, her voice trembling on the verge of tears. There has to be something we can do. He can't just sell the house without telling Mrs. That's illegal, isn't it? Money for what? Jeremy barked, the edge of contempt slicing through his words. In case you forgot, I lost my job 6 months ago, and your marketing salary doesn't even cover our car payments. Then get another job, Caitlin snapped back, her voice cracking under pressure. You think that's news to me? Oh, sure, Jeremy sneered, because financial firms are just dying to hire advisors fired over questionable trades. You really think someone's gonna take a risk on me again? I watched as Caitlin's expression crumbled. The truth was unspooling before her like a slow-motion car crash. No house, no inheritance, no savings. And now Jeremy's long-concealed unemployment laid bare, sharp and humiliating. She lowered her voice to a whisper, barely audible through the phone's speaker. How could he be this cruel? Jeremy turned to her, voice cold, armor finally falling away. Cruel, he spat. Cruel like calling your own father a burden? Cruel like trying to stick him in a storage closet with nurses instead of love? Maybe we got what we deserved. That old man, he exhaled, jaw tight. He outplayed both of us. Through the camera feed, I watched them collapse into my old furniture. The same chairs, the same couch, the same worn-out coffee table. All of it would be gone by tomorrow. The new owners were moving in, and they'd haul it all out with clinical efficiency, erasing the last of my presence from that place. Caitlin buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking, while Jeremy sat staring at the letter I had written them, his expression that of a man who finally realized just how deeply he had been outmaneuvered. I turned off the camera. I had seen enough. Stepping into the cramped kitchen of my small apartment, I reached into the cabinet and pulled out the bottle of Ellen's favorite wine, a 2018 Bordeaux we had saved from the old house. We'd always said we'd open it on a special occasion. That occasion never came, until now. I poured myself a glass, the red liquid catching the light, rich and deep. I lifted it gently, turning to face the photo of Ellen that I kept by the sink. To you, my love, I whispered. Justice has finally been served. The wine tasted like victory. They had finally learned what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. My phone buzzed, an incoming message from an unknown number. Most likely Caitlin, trying a new way to reach me. I didn't bother to read it. I deleted the message without hesitation and powered the phone off completely. Walking to the window, I gazed out at the Denver skyline bathed in the golden hues of sunset. Somewhere across that sprawling city, my daughter and her husband were beginning to suffer the consequences of their cruelty. Somewhere, inside the walls of what used to be my home, they were realizing that the burden they had tried to cast aside had just become their biggest problem. For the first time in 2 years since Ellen passed, I felt truly, completely free. I was no longer someone's burden, no longer someone's obligation. I was me again, with money, with choices, with a future stretching out in front of me like a wide open road. Roy Hayes had left the building, and he wasn't coming back. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for listening.